For years, we've had an ongoing debate about which Souls game is the best, but today I wanted to talk about the best aspect of each Souls game, from Demon Souls all the way to Elden Ring. I'll include timestamps for each game so you can skip around if there's one you haven't played before. Starting with Demon Souls, we have the atmosphere. I didn't play the original Demon Souls, but the remake really seemed to capture what made the game so popular in the first place. This was the last Souls game I played besides Elden Ring, and I was shocked at how well it held up in comparison to the rest of the games. It truly feels like it has its own identity. Seeing a huge castle at the beginning and making my way through Boletaria was a feeling I thought was no longer possible for a Souls veteran. While the medieval theme obviously continued throughout the series, the world itself feels very unique in comparison to the later entries. Demon Souls is a much shorter game, but the vibe feels very consistent and makes sense all the way through. All the items and weapons fit with the world very well, and nothing feels super out of place. Obviously, there were some mechanics that weren't fully perfected yet, but the world building was nothing short of brilliant and allowed for an incredibly immersive experience. Moving on to Dark Souls, we have the level design, obviously. I think everyone can agree that this was certainly the strong point of this game. The interconnectivity of the world in Dark Souls is incredible, and I genuinely remember my mouth hanging wide open when I'd find myself back in Firelink Shrine thinking I was miles away from it. The amount of shortcuts and secret paths in this game is unbelievable, and the fact that they made so many areas connect back to the main hub without you noticing is insanely impressive. Obviously, it falls apart after Anor Londo, but I think the first half of this game really showed what FromSoft was capable of in terms of level design. The way the world was designed allowed for total freedom of the player based on their skill level while still pulling them toward the intended direction, which is something totally unique in gaming. And the formula was pretty simple. If you go to an area that's too hard, go somewhere else. You're probably not supposed to be there yet. The most popular example of this is the graveyard right in front of Firelink Shrine that encourages players to find another path by making sure they beat your ass. They send the message loud and clear. The lore along with the world ties together very well and allows for a very fresh experience, and one I'll certainly never forget. Dark Souls 2, the experimentation. This game did so many things wrong and so many things right. It's strange to me that they didn't add back any of the things they did right until later. While 4 months ago I probably would have said power stancing as the best thing, Elden Ring ended up adding that back, so it felt kind of pointless to mention here. But I also really like the item and weapon variety as well as the lore of this game. Besides the other little things I'll mention in a second, the thing I personally loved in this game was the bonfire aesthetic. This was an item that allowed you to reset any area, including the boss, and I'm really sad that no other game has this. I also want to mention the Pharaoh's Lockstones, because even though Elden Ring added these in the form of stone sword keys, they don't quite work the same way. In Dark Souls 2, it felt like you never had enough keys to unlock every Pharaoh's Lockstone, so you had to pick and choose which ones intrigued you. You might get cool items or run into a hidden boss, and while the same is true for Elden Ring, they felt a little bit lazier. I felt like I always had enough keys in Elden Ring to open any fog wall I wanted, and the inside just never felt as cool or crazy as Dark Souls 2, aside from a few exceptions. They also had the fragrant branches of Yor that did a similar thing. There'd be a statue that you could bring back to life in order to get past it into a new area. What was most interesting about this item to me is that some of them even had bonfires behind them, which is a really cool addition. Getting a more convenient checkpoint is desperately needed in Dark Souls 2. Enemies also stop spawning after you kill them 15 times to prevent farming, but let's be honest, it's not super hard to grind levels in this game. I do think it's kind of nice though due to the enemies' aggro range, since it feels like they never stop chasing you. A lot of the time I found myself killing the enemies every time I went through an area on my first playthrough, and it was really nice when they were finally gone. There was so much experimentation, and while certain things like life gems probably won't make a return, I still think FromSoft's B team did a good job coming up with fresh ideas. Next, we have the almighty Bloodborne, the game many people consider to be the greatest Souls game ever. There's so many things I could have picked for Bloodborne: the combat system, the Lovecraftian horror art style, the weapons. So many things in this game stand out, but the areas in this game are just unmatched. This is different from level design where the areas flow and connect perfectly. I'm talking about how enjoyable and aesthetically pleasing each area in this game is to progress. When I went back and played this game after completing all the others again, I noticed how little I would dread going through certain areas. When I replay something like Dark Souls 3, for example, I tend to dread the first few areas of the game, and that definitely takes away part of my excitement. Thinking about revisiting areas such as the Farron Keep Deep or the Road of Sacrifices is enough for me to avoid playing the game again altogether, but Bloodborne is the opposite. Each area follows the classic Fromsoftware level design formula perfectly while still making it enjoyable to traverse. Places like Cathedral Ward have so many areas to explore, and the way each area is set up was executed very well. The level design is great on top of that and makes this game feel connected in a way that only the original Dark Souls could rival. Bloodborne was without a doubt the most excited I was to see what was coming next each time I finished a level, especially with the cosmic horror theme that came up later. Not to mention the DLC having a completely different feel to it while still maintaining the atmosphere that made this game great. It's so good that I probably would have played through this game dozens of times if it weren't for a couple issues I'll talk about in a later video. After Bloodborne, FromSoft released Dark Souls 3. To me, this one is a no-brainer, the boss fights. This was the first Souls game I played, and I found myself disappointed by the bosses when I went back to play the previous entries because they set the bar so damn high. I remember taking a video to send to my friend when I finally beat the Abyss Watchers with my hands shaking like crazy, only to see that there was another phase. There's only a few bosses in this game I would consider to be meh, and most of these would be considered great bosses in any other series. Not to mention the absolute masterpiece of boss design in the DLC, Freed, Gale, Midir, Twin Princes. These four alone are some of the best and most challenging fights in the series. In the main game, we have Pontiff, Abyss Watchers, Dancer, Twin Princes, Nameless King, Soul of Cinder, all just incredible fights that are balanced extremely well with your character level and the lore. This game mastered the balance between difficult and fun, making even the most challenging bosses enjoyable to fight over and over. Moving on, we have the only game that I think could rival the boss fights in Dark Souls 3, Sekiro. But I think there's one thing they did better. The combat, of course. While I was tempted to give this crown to Bloodborne due to the fast-paced gameplay along with the rally system, I think Sekiro objectively should take this spot. Not only is it the most satisfying combat system in my opinion, it also has tons of different tactics you can use outside of your sword. While I would have loved opportunities for different weapons to use, learning new skills such as the Makiri counter and the Ashina cross, as well as using the different prosthetic tools at your disposal, really added some depth to the gameplay. A lot of people don't like the game as much due to the lack of build variety, but I think they provide more than enough tools to combat this issue, no pun intended. Sure, you can't use a giant slow weapon that does massive damage, but that takes away from the whole point of the gameplay. It's give and take. The flow of combat in this game is balanced perfectly. Even when you're defending, you're still on offense. You can still R1 spam through a few of the basic enemies, but for the most part, that ability is gone. What I think makes the combat in this game so good is instead of dodging and waiting for an enemy to finish their attacks, you're an active participant the whole way through. When they're attacking, you're deflecting. Then you're attacking. Then you're using the umbrella to counter and get a free hit. Then you're deflecting. You're constantly taking actions rather than just rolling away, and I think that's what makes the combat so satisfying when you get that death blow. Coming in last, but certainly not least, we have the masterpiece that is Elden Ring. This game is interesting because they do a lot very well, and it's obviously very different being an open world game. I think what Elden Ring does best is convenience, and this has a few meanings. This game doesn't waste your time and continues giving you the freedom and satisfaction to fight and explore without making you go a certain way or run 5 miles back to a boss fight. You can also level up at bonfires, travel back to any site of grace from anywhere in the open world, and customize your Ashes of War while resting. Obviously, the exploration is another thing they do incredibly well, which I think ties into this, and the only reason exploration wasn't my main choice is because the rewards you get didn't seem worth it very often. But Elden Ring is by far the best game to just hop in and enjoy yourself without worrying about ruining your entire playthrough by accidentally hitting the Firekeeper. It was FromSoftware's attempt at making a noob-friendly Souls game, and I think with that came a lot of convenience that even Souls vets can appreciate. Torrent is another example of this, which is not only super fun for fighting enemies and bosses, but also just makes the experience much better. If Elden Ring was made 5 years ago, I just know they would have made us run everywhere on foot and we still would have loved it. There are plenty of other aspects that Elden Ring does incredibly well, but after playing all the other games through again, its convenience is what stood out the most for me.